So I'm going to talk to you about agency and empowerment among Breton speakers in Brittany. A few definitions first, maybe. Agency is the capacity, the condition, or state of acting or of exerting power. And empowerment, of course, is a word that's been used foremost for, for the context such as the black community in the US or women's empowerment, but also for minority language speakers in like, for example, Commons. It's either the act or action of empowering someone or something, the granting, or else the state of being empowered to do something. And we'll see that in the Breton context, it will sometimes be one thing and then the next thing. Brittany, quickly, territory and languages. So this is very small. If it was on the big screen upstairs, you'd see that, there's a whole lot of branches from European languages all the way to the 6 modern Celtic languages, of which one of them is Breton, the only continental one, from the Brittonic family, together with Welsh and Cornish. Basically, it's a language that came from Britain in between the 3rd and 6th century AD, and mixed together with a certain amount of Gaulish that was still spoken in the peninsula of Armorica at the time. It's debated whether there was a lot of Gaulish spoken back then or very little. Is it a 80% mix or more than that or less? It's not very clear. But anyway, the two languages were very close to each other. Now, France, as you know, likes everything rational, or so they say. So this was the project. The first with the map here without the little squares is actually the 1789 Sieyès and Tourist geometrical proposal. France was to be cut into départements, which would be exactly the same size, and except for, of course, when it comes to Brittany or maybe the Basque Country or whatever. But that was the initial project. And when you think of it, the actual project now on the right hand side, you don't look at the colors for the moment, but just look at the black linings. Shows you that of course they are not squares, but we're not far from the initial project. Really, it's the same idea. The provinces were abolished, and we had new départements that were the same size, not the same population, but more or less the same size. Luckily, Brittany was still sort of made up of 5 départements at the time, but it lost its name and its actual existence, really, just like the other provinces of France. Decentralization now 2-0. You had 1-0 during the French Revolution. We have 2-0 now. On the left-hand side, you have the map of the languages that are or were spoken in France. Still are, actually, but by minorities in most cases, apart from the islands, the overseas territories where the languages are still spoken by the majority there, but otherwise they're all spoken by minorities. And as you can see, Breton is the language that's spoken on the very western part of the Armorican Peninsula. And on the right-hand side, you have the new Régions as they were designed in 2015. And you can see here that the same rationale, if we can call it that, has been used again. Regions or régions in France are merely deconcentrated administrative units, and that's all they are, right? There isn't one region, except for maybe Corsica and I suppose Normandy here, which correspond to something historical or cultural. Everything else is just administrative and either too big or too small, or putting together regions that have never decided to be together, and languages are of course not taken into consideration whatsoever. Brittany managed to stay somehow, but as I'm going to show you on the next slide, for the past 70 years now, there's been one bit missing, and not just one little bit, because it's the southern bit, which has the old capital of Nantes, and which happens to be the richest and the most heavily populated as well. So de facto, when you talk about doing something for the Breton language in the Lower-Atlantic department in the south, you're talking about something that's not even territorial and non-territorial, but nearly extra-territorial. Now, there's no official status for regional languages in France, as you all know. The language of the Republic is French. Regional languages belong to France's heritage, but nothing else. You know, it's of course the European Charter has been signed, but it was never ratified and will not be. Something that's maybe not as well known. We've been talking a lot about the rights of the child because it's the 30th anniversary this week. And the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child doesn't apply for France as far as Article 30 is concerned, because it's the rights of indigenous children, and of course belonging to minorities. And because France doesn't acknowledge any minority, well, it just doesn't apply. And Breton and Gallo is a Romance language that's spoken in the eastern part of Brittany, were declared languages of Brittany in 2004 by the Regional Council, but that was purely symbolic. Autonomy now is another near taboo term in France. Although French Polynesia Autonomy Act in 2004 actually uses the word. The New Caledonia Act doesn't use it, but customary law, especially since 2007, applies to Kanak communities. And then you have places like Corsica, which has a little bit more autonomy, even though the very word of Corsican people was declared unconstitutional. And in Mayotte, personal status for Muslim citizens. In Wallis and Futuna, power sharing with 3 kings. In Alsace-Moselle, the laïcité, which is the strict, rigid separation of church and state, doesn't apply. So, there are arrangements. But Brittany as such is just like any other French region without any particular status. Now, community, as I'm going to use it now, can be a variety of things. Common interests, common characteristics, interests scattered through larger society, common history, common social, economic, political interests, common policy, certainly, because the common policy applies to all regions of France, or just an interacting population of various kinds of individuals. And we'll see that the present community of Breton speakers is concerned with that the number F definition. This is the evolution of the diglossic situation in Lower Brittany. In the 19th century, in Lower Brittany, in the west of Brittany, nearly everybody spoke Breton. You couldn't live without knowing Breton and conduct your own everyday business. And of course, a century and a half after, it's the reverse situation. Nearly everybody is monolingual, and there's a certain proportion of bilinguals. This is also the way that things happened in terms of languages received at home during the 20th century. So it's a big, enormous drop. And the main reasons, well, they are quite well known. There were the school laws, first of all, at the end of the 19th century. And then, of course, economic interest during most of the 20th, fashion, of course. And then a near collapse of family transmission after the Second World War. And today, this is the result of today. Now, on the right-hand side, you have the result of a survey that was conducted in 2018, where you can see that not even 6% of the total population of Brittany, not just Lower, but also Upper Brittany, is able to speak Breton, or declares to be able to speak Breton, which means that Breton speakers are a minority within the minority. The population has grown, and the population of Breton speakers has gone down and down and down. Yeah. So this is the situation now, whereby the reason why non-territorial autonomy could apply in our situation is, look at the east of the peninsula. You can see here that the Breton language is not spoken traditionally, but all the little circles here show places where there are schools or a certain amount of local communities that do use the Breton language on an everyday basis. The Breton language is, as I said, spoken mostly in the west. But when it comes to hearing Breton around you, you see that maybe 1% or 10% of the people in the east still hear the language as well. Pyramid, of course, is very unhealthy, but as you can see at the bottom, there's this little start of renewal, mostly through schools. Mode of acquisition completely different between the elderly and the young ones. School for the young ones, and from home for the old elderly. And frequency of use, that's the good news. Frequency of use is much better in the younger generation than it is in the older generation. So there aren't that many speakers, but they do use their language, or declare to use their language on an everyday basis much more than the rest. Now, agency. A few examples. What did the Bretons do back in the 70s? They created their own schools, just like that, out of the blue. And why am I talking about non-territorial? Well, look at the map on the right hand side. Normally, you would have thought that people would have asked for schools through the medium of Breton just in the west of the peninsula, but actually, the east of the peninsula, where I was born myself on the River Loire, they do also ask for Breton schools. This is the growth, the increase for the past 40 years, but it's only 3% of the total school population in Brittany. Adult learners, same thing as schools. We need to have speakers from not just the bottom of the pyramid, but also the top. So Bretons created their own adult learners centres, not just in the west of Brittany, but also in the east, as you can see here on the map. So it's, again, when I say non-territorial, I don't mean that the east of Brittany is not Brittany, but traditionally they didn't speak the language. And as you can see, west and east, a lot of people, just as many people, wish they had Breton themselves. 1/3 of people. Media, same. You can see that the first 4 radio stations were created in the west, but recently in the east as well, in Nantes, a new radio station is also working, has been broadcasting for a couple of months or maybe 6 months or so. Now, bilingual signage, agency, well, in a very practical way, because, destroying signs, painting signs in black, and empowerment, because then, of course, municipalities and départements gradually adopted the equal bilingual signage. But it's completely incomplete because national roads are still monolingual. Now, this is just one example of what happens whenever locally everything is done so that the language can pick up again. This is a little place in central Brittany that's called Carré, and because there are lots of Breton schools, we can see that it's picking up again, not in couples, in between friends, with the children. So whenever the conditions are met, even in Brittany, even with all the opposition from the French centralized authorities, it does work. And of course, the sense of belonging is all the bigger when you do speak one of the languages of Brittany, especially Breton speakers. Now, conclusion, take-home messages. Yeah. Breton remains a highly endangered language, that's clear. But Breton speakers, of course, are a minority within the minority, but revivalism is not a counterculture margin. Language promotion now enjoys support, mostly passive, from the majority of people across Brittany, mostly as a badge of identity, but across Brittany, east and west. And speakerdom, that was once compact in Lower Brittany, is gradually transforming into a network community of practice. And this is my last slide. A resumption of family transmission is possible, as showed by the example in Carré. Agency and bottom-up initiatives have proved vital in our case. Neither the one nation, one people, one language ideology engraved in the French Constitution, nor the present political context make it possible to achieve territorial or not even non-territorial autonomy in Brittany. But we have achieved a measure of empowerment, support from regional authorities, and it can therefore be claimed that a version of low-key, de facto, non-territorial autonomy has emerged for Breton speakers across Brittany in the shape of a network community. So thank you very much.